Hello. Today I actually want to be talking a little bit about grief, mainly because it's something that has come up for me this week in an unusual way, I suppose. Mainly because I think I've stuck my head in the sand to it. And I wanted to shed some light on how grief can show up in so many different ways, and actually the importance of opening the door to grief and really inviting our feelings to be felt and expressed. So I've been having some challenges recently, and it only became more clear to me yesterday that it can have something to do with grief. And kind of feeling this almost like navigating an unseen grief. And so it's linked to COVID-19. And I want to already start with a caveat that I totally acknowledge a great deal of people around the world experienced enormous amount of loss. It could be their livelihood, it could be worse so a loved one, they can be forever injured in some way. So I just want to mention that before I go into my own grief, because mine might seem small compared. And of course, there's no comparison when it comes to our feelings and our experiences, and in this case, our grief. But I wanted to mention that right up front. And let's face it, during the pandemic, the thousands, perhaps millions of lives were uprooted, and the loss was incredible for so many people. In my case, it's actually the loss of a physical space. And that can also leave a mark on our hearts. A home is actually so much more than just bricks and mortar, the furniture we put in our home. It holds memories, emotions, and a deep sense of belonging and often safety. And in the case of me, and I'm sure many others as well, when circumstances beyond our control force us to leave a place we've called home for a significant period, the grief that follows can be unexpected and profound. And if you're like me, maybe you just keep on moving forward, keep on being busy without actually stopping to feel what is there. So in my case, I lived in Asia for 25 years. I called Hong Kong home for all those years. But of course, I traveled a lot in the region, but that was home. And for me, it wasn't just a city, but a vibrant tapestry that wove itself into the fabric of my life, of my being. It witnessed my joys, my challenges, my adventures, my immense growth. And it really was my solid ground. And I underscore that because for those of you who've had the ground beneath you pulled from underneath you, you might know what that feels like. But when my husband and I left our home in the first year of the pandemic, we were actually just going on a holiday. I just had a big birthday, and we decided to go to Europe. And I'd also, at the time, everything was very relaxed in Hong Kong, and We had also experienced in the city back in 2003, we'd experienced another SARS illness that was almost completely local. So I just figured, well, this is just going to take a few months and it's not going to be a big deal. But because we just went on a holiday, that meant that I didn't go through the natural or normal process of and the practicalities of closing the important chapter in my life. We were just going on a holiday. But however, as COVID-19 cast its veil of uncertainty, returning to this place that I'd called home for 25 years became increasingly difficult. So we decided to wait it out. We decided to wait it out in Europe. And we waited for 3 years. We were subletting our home, and I was constantly busy with finding new subletters, and all our belongings were there. But we waited until we stopped, until we realized that we need to close this door once and for all. And the way that I closed that door was by leaving all our belongings there. And we had a lovely Filipino lady that helped me on WhatsApp video, helped me get rid of all our things, give it away, etc. Yeah. And in this whole time, I was just busying myself with other things, busying myself with, trying to navigate my business that had been Asia based, trying to navigate it, going online, doing all these different projects, being very busy, not really feeling what I was feeling around this topic. And grief often wears a cloak of, well, sometimes wear a cloak of familiarity, known to accompany the loss of a loved one. And yet the weight of loss can also, at times, sometimes be disguised in another cloak. It can show up as lethargy or overwhelm, or perhaps distracting ourselves like I did. It can also show up in the physical body, physical ailments. But what happens when grief is directed towards a place, like in my case? It can often catch us off guard, leaving us to grapple with the mix of emotions, as it had to with me now, because although, like all of us, I really struggled through the pandemic. I struggled with a lot of yearning to go back home. I struggled with feeling a great deal of loneliness and isolation, because I suddenly found myself in a city where I didn't have any friends. And then I found myself in a city where we had extreme lockdowns. So you can imagine, I don't think anybody's really keen to have a new friend in the middle of a global pandemic. So even if other friends from other locations wanted to introduce me to people in Berlin, people were scared. They didn't really want to meet up with a random stranger. So back to Hong Kong, the loss of Hong Kong, my Hong Kong home, after so many years, I mean, the only home that I've had as a professional, it carries a profound significance for me, because it represents a multitude of experiences, relationships, very importantly, a sense of belonging. And even when I went back in March of last year, I needed to do some practicalities, and most of the restrictions were lifted. I realized I went to a particular office in a part of the city, and I realized I could literally be blindfolded and I could just get everything done blindfolded. That's how familiar the city is with me, for me. But relationships were left behind, and this sense of belonging. So of course now I look back, and of course it's natural to feel a sense of emptiness and longing when confronted with the reality of leaving it behind. It was my place of belonging. It was my place of purpose. And it was my place, like I said earlier, of deep familiarity. So this is already over 3 years ago. But of late, it's become increasingly clear that I have some grieving to do. Because I never actually said goodbye in any meaningful way, nor did I give myself time to grieve once it became apparent that we would not return. Still, I just jumped into the practicalities of things, of emptying the house, and yeah. So the bittersweet journey of bidding farewell to such a cherished home and finding solace in the midst of change, that is a work in progress. And in fact, it was really just in a session I received yesterday that grief came up as a possible root of some seemingly unrelated issues that I'm dealing with. And so I saw it so clearly how I had just continued to be busy, doing my best to be productive, something our society really values, of course, yeah? Rather than acknowledging that I had to let go. And, society doesn't encourage this, encourage deep feeling, encourage us to stop, reflect, notice what's coming up with such big events. It certainly doesn't encourage us to stop and feel anything. Society encourages productivity, and I'm very good at that, right? So I just got busy. So why is grief showing up now, that much longer after we left the city? Well, the inner cycles of a woman's life are deeply connected to the seasons. Yeah. In fact, something that I missed out on in Hong Kong because we didn't have the full 4 seasons. And now that I'm in Europe, I really notice my wish to hibernate during winter. And winter really symbolizes the time to go inward. Time to surrender to what is, to allow for the not knowing, so that when we step towards spring, to the light, we will emerge with vitality, gained wisdom, and a renewed sense of self, having left behind what we needed to leave behind, i.e., whatever needed to die and be left behind could be left behind and not weighing us down in the new season. So within this wintry time, our nature sends an invitation to allow for grief to arise. Grief of having to let go. And what naturally arises when journeying into the wintry womb space is just that. And inside of that wintry space is also where we feel, going into our bellies, into our hearts, into our souls. And in fact, we have an amazing natural body-based intelligence and intuition to take deep care of ourselves in our lives. And I didn't listen to this for these last few years. I just soldiered on. So now I have to say I am left with a little bit of, what now? But it's definitely a case for me to stop, to feel, to acknowledge my humanity. Because grief in all its forms requires gentle care and self-compassion. And all these things that I've been, like I said, these seemingly unconnected things, it's my heart, the ache in my heart that is speaking to me. And that ache is valid. And so it's time to really feel that loss, feel what I'm missing. In fact, before embracing the new. So I suppose for me, the lesson comes back to a very old, familiar one. Feel your feelings. Feel your feelings. The root of healing is through the feelings. So how can you give yourself space to feel today and tomorrow? What is it that you need to feel? Perhaps you need to look a bit closer, and that perhaps requires a bit more time. It might be snuggling up in the sofa in front of the fireplace with a nice cup of tea. It might be journaling, speaking to a trusted friend. It could be moving the body. And if you, like me, have some unresolved grief, maybe it's also helpful to attend grief groups. Or for something more individual, work with a trusted counselor or therapist. And that for me is always a great way of being held. Because the thing with working with a professional is that they can take you places that perhaps on your own you cannot. So I'm going to park the soldiering on, and I'm going to sit on my sofa in front of the fireplace in a little bit with a cup of tea and feel what is there. From my heart to yours, thank you for being here. I hope to see you in one of my other recordings. Bye for now.